Hey guys, this is a segment from the Slumpbuster Podcast. You can find the full episode on any of the various podcast platforms, or of course, subscribe to us on YouTube for more of our content. Other than that, guys, sit down, bust a slump, and enjoy. The Pac-12, they announced that they're going to finally get back into things. This is about a week and a half, 2 weeks after the Big Ten announced that they were going to come back. November 7th, 6th, 7th weekend is when they're expecting to have their initial kickoff. Most teams, if I'm not mistaken, are going to play a 7-game schedule. And I know that the Pac-12 hasn't gotten much love anyway from the committee, the selection committee, in terms of making it to the playoffs and having an opportunity to compete for the title. Oregon, you mentioned them. They were projected to be at least in the top 10, have an opportunity to break that mold if by chance one of those higher-tiered SEC teams, Clemson, or let's say Ohio State happened to just blow it. Do you think that there is any opportunity now with an abbreviated schedule for an Oregon or any Pac-12 team to make it into the BCS college football playoffs?
See, I was wondering that earlier, how bad the 7-game schedule would hurt them, just because they're playing a little less games, and they're starting later. And I mean, I guess if you go 7-0, you always have a chance because you got to listen to what the committee's going to put you in there and see how you do. But I think it's going to hurt you, especially like you said, being on the West Coast already hurts them as well. I did read something that the Pac-12 was trying to get the BCS to add more playoff teams this year, but I think they got denied on that one. So they already know that they're kind of already hurting themselves. And to be honest, you said, that it's going to start
November 6th and 7th weekend.
So I heard Chip Kelly come out, and he said he still would be surprised if the season even happens. He said that, basically the Pac-12 is kind of dragging their feet. And, yeah, they're talking about it we'll do it, but they have no real plan. They just said, yeah, we're going to come back, but they have no real plan to actually how they're going to do COVID testing, how they're going to play these games. And that's from Chip Kelly himself. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Pac-12 actually follows through with it. And they've been real quiet, the Pac-12, and it's kind of weird. They put out stuff yeah, we want to play, but it's they're not really taking a stand for or against it. And it's kind of weird to me that the Pac-12 is basically they're just following whatever the Big Ten does. And hopefully that they're thinking that whatever the Big Ten does, we'll just follow right behind them and we'll look good too.
Yeah, and I think one of the unique things that the Pac-12 has to deal with is a lot of the decisions have been taken out of their hands. A lot of politics have been involved in the decision making. A lot of these schools obviously based out in California, which has a little bit more restrictions than other parts of the country given the COVID pandemic. And I could definitely see, as you mentioned, the Pac-12, even with this announcement, potentially not happening. Now, I want to see it. You mentioned Oregon. Oregon has always been a team with so much swag. I love watching Oregon. But they've also had one of their top recruits, I believe Penei Sewell, believed to be a generational offensive lineman that's going to go very high in next year's draft. I believe he's already has opted out of this coming year, regardless if they decide to play or not. And that's going to obviously hurt them. I'm sure there's other players, given the uncertainty, who have also just made that decision to just opt out. I believe Oregon would still be the favorite. I don't think USC is ready to compete at all. UCLA, Chip hasn't shown that he has that old Chip Kelly magic at all. Utah's actually has been a team that's been competing, but really they were always going to be dealt a bad hand in general when it came to selection committee. And then the fact is, like you mentioned, is 7-0 even good enough? 7-0 in the Pac-12 versus a 2-loss SEC team, a 2-loss Big Ten team. You could play a lot of arguments and different debates that would have the selection committee leaning in favor of those other teams based off competition level from the get-go. There's just not a lot of things in favor of the Pac-12, even if they do get going. But I think it's just a good thing for them to do for their athletes, because they're having this tough thing happen to them where they're losing a lot of recruits that are in their hometowns, they're in their states, in their cities. And I think you can't keep losing kids that were born in LA to go play in Alabama. I was looking at USC's recruiting over the last few years and how their classes are rated have consistently been going down and down. It's just because they keep losing their top guys in California. How is that even possible? USC was one of the biggest brands whenever I was growing up. And now they just don't have that same cachet. The only one that still has that cachet is Oregon, and Oregon just because they have the Nike deal. They have the creative jersey. So they're always at people's forefront. And we haven't seen a competitive USC team since Pete Carroll.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's no secret the top athletes for football come out of Florida, Texas, or California. And if you can't recruit in your own backyard, there's something wrong with your program. And they need to, fix that. And I think UCLA is far away from it. I think USC is far away from it. And kids, they grow up and they want that instant gratification. They want to win now. They don't want you to promise, maybe by your senior year we'll be competitive. No, I want to go somewhere where I'm going to be looked at. I can be going to the NFL within, the next couple of years and actually trying to win a championship. And that's what none of these schools, like you said, they can, Oregon and maybe Utah can provide it. Maybe another school will step up. Stanford always seems to play better than they are, and they have a little bit more connections with the NFL. They could promise you a little bit more, but you go to Oregon and you play USC, you play UCLA, and you get a win over it. It's not the same anymore as going to Alabama and getting a big win over a team like LSU. To you, when you tell the stories when you get older as a kid, that's going to sound more exciting, more pumped up, and make you feel more proud as a player, I think.
And you talk about the NFL pipeline. When it comes to schools and their connections, part of that also is just being on national TV, being the primary focus. Obviously, a lot of people miss out on Pac-12 games given time zones. And I obviously didn't have much of an appreciation for time zones until I moved 1 hour more, adding from the Mountain Standard Time to Central Time. It is harder to stay up for a Pac-12 game than it used to be. And obviously, if you're on the East Coast, you do miss a lot of that, kids in those spotlights. But you will see Alabama. You will see LSU. And if these teams keep getting those BCS games, those playoff games, those big-time bowl games, as opposed to these Pac-12 teams, that's also going to limit exposure. And that's something that if you're a recruiter, if you're Alabama, if you're Debo Sweeney out there in Clemson, you can just pitch to these kids that, UCLA can't anymore. And I think that's just going to hurt them in the long run. So I think it is important for them to get back out there. I think it's important for them to commit the money, whatever it takes, to make sure that they can put on a season, because other conferences are doing it. The Big Ten was probably the one that shifted their readiness and ability to do it the most. But I believe when you look at what's going on in the Big 12, I went to a UT game. Everything seemed fine for the most part. I know there's little cases here and there. I know Baylor ran into some trouble this past week, but since we've managed to move on, and with the SEC, they've made the financial commitment to do it. It's just how much do those Pac-12 teams care about ensuring that their athletes have the same opportunity as the other kids around the country?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on there. There's no more argument from here. I think the Pac-12 has to look into what they're doing and change it up, because out here in California, just the junior colleges alone have a lot of athletes. A lot of recruitment from the junior colleges go out of state, like you were saying earlier. Pac-12 needs to look themselves in the mirror and see what they're doing wrong. Basically, their whole conference needs to be fixed, not just the big powerhouse schools.